Welcome back, kiddos. Hope that you enjoyed yesterday's assignment. Now, yesterday, you guys looked into this crime that was committed in the year 1096. Now, you guys read about these wonderful sights that we're seeing. These 70,000 people dying, people shooting each other with bows and arrows, people being thrown into flames. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is described as being filled to your knees in blood. Now, most of you guys correctly identified that the person, or people rather, responsible for this crime were the Christians. And you guys saw why the Christians did it. Today we're going to look a little bit deeper into this crime that commonly historians call the Crusades. Now, if you've ever played the video game Assassin's Creed, this is what that video game is all about. So yesterday, what you guys looked at is you looked at the First Crusade. Now, you looked at the descriptions of this First Crusade and all these horrible atrocities that were happening. Now, mainly, the Crusades were about two different people groups. From Europe, you have the Christians. Now, down in the Middle East and North Africa, you have the Muslims. This map shows it very beautifully. Up in here, you have the Roman Catholic Church, the Christians, led by the Pope. Down here in this red color, you have the religion of Islam, the Muslims. Now, notice, the most important city in all of this, the city known as Jerusalem, was actually occupied by the Muslims. We'll look into that in a couple of moments. But the Crusades was all about Christians reclaiming the city of Jerusalem on behalf of the religion of Christianity. Now, I want to sort of pique your interest on this. So I'm going to start out by showing you this video that will sort of give you a nice little preview of the coming attraction. So enjoy, kids.
For thousands of years, the holy lands of the Middle East have run with blood. Here, the scars of battle fought between three of the great religions of the world are etched into the earth. But the deepest wound was made by a war between Christian and Muslim, begun at the close of the 11th century and fought for 200 years. At stake, a tiny strip of land just a few hundred miles long, but with the greatest prize: Jerusalem. Now this holy war has passed into legend. But there were those who saw it with their own eyes. Great chroniclers from two different worlds, Christian and Muslim, who wrote of great deeds, great battles, great warriors, of men who would lay down their lives for their God. This was the collision of two great faiths, the clash between the crescent and the cross. This was the Crusades.
Oh, that is so cool. Now, I hope you're amped. Now, I wanted to revisit this image. We looked at this a couple months back when we were first learning about the religion of Islam. Now, what you didn't know then that you will probably know now is this is actually a painting of the recapture of Jerusalem by the Christians taking over and slaughtering the Muslim occupants. Now, you guys notice in the background, that building looks familiar. You got your dome, your pillars, your minaret. Now, here you have victorious Christians, and down here you have the pictures of the defeated Muslims. Even though we looked at this a couple months ago, now you're looking at it in a different context. The context that is the Crusades. Now let's backtrack just a tad. On Wednesday, Miss Cherchin, she did a really good job explaining you the system of feudalism in Europe, the hierarchy of who has the power and who does not have the power. Now at the top, you got kings, queens, lords, ladies, knights, peasants, and serf. But above them all is the church. The church has more power than anything. Now, the head of the church, this guy known as the Pope, is literally the conduit of God. In other words, he's the guy who translates the will of God to all people on earth, or so you believe if you are a Christian living in Europe during the Middle Ages. Now, here's the problem. When the Pope says to do something, you have to do it. Now, keep that in mind because today we're going to be looking at that. Remember yesterday, the Pope said if you go to Jerusalem and fight on behalf of Christianity, you automatically have a ticket to heaven. Now, as soon as the Pope called Christians to go to the Middle East, go to places like Jerusalem to fight on behalf of Christianity, people went by the thousands. But here's the problem. Traveling back then was not exactly a piece of cake. They didn't have planes, they didn't have trains, they didn't have cars, so there was only a couple ways that you could possibly get to the Middle East. Number one, if you were rich enough, you could hop onto a back of a horse and you could ride there. That's probably the most convenient. Number two, if you have a lot of money, you could hop onto a boat, you could sail across the Mediterranean Sea, and you could transport yourself to Jerusalem that way. But once again, that's really expensive. The most common way that people would actually go from Europe to Jerusalem was, yes, you guessed it, they would walk there. This would literally take years to arrive, and then they arrived to the chaos and fighting that was happening within Jerusalem. So, picking up basically on what we learned about yesterday, the story all starts in 1071 when Muslims take control of the city of Jerusalem. Now remember, this city is so important because Jesus Christ was crucified in this city. So if you're a Christian, this is the most important city in all of your religion. So what happens is the Pope calls on the Byzantine emperor, really this emperor of Eastern Europe. He calls for help. So in 1097, I'm sorry, reverse that. The Byzantine emperor calls for the Pope for help. So in 1097, the Pope issues this decree, and all of these Christians flood into the Holy Land to start fighting on behalf of Christianity. Now, we are the champions. We are the champions. No time for losers, 'cause we are the champions of the world. So here's the good news. If you are a Christian living in medieval Europe, after 3 years of fighting, you retake Jerusalem. You win. You conquer the Muslims, and it only took you 3 years, which is great, right? Now here's the problem. If you're a Christian living in medieval Europe, you're very sad after 3 years because the Muslims almost immediately take it back. Now, if you thought that was bad, just wait till this. If you're a Christian living in medieval Europe, you continue to fight for 100 more years and you are unsuccessful. Fight and fight and fight, and you are defeated and defeated and defeated. The problem is the Muslims had really good military strategy, they had really good organization, and they had really good leaders. This guy in particular named Saladin was basically the ultimate opponent of the Christians, and Saladin was a very, very, very good leader. So unfortunately for the Christian knights, they were never successful in fully reclaiming Jerusalem on behalf of Christian Europe. Now, that is not to say that the effects, or that the Crusades did not come with some massive effects. There's 3 really big ones. Number 1, feudalism. What Miss Tertian taught you on Wednesday, the system of hierarchy, was massively weakened. The reason is if the Pope, literally the person who's talking on behalf of God, says that you should go and fight, these serfs, the slave workers essentially working in Europe, they say, okay, I can either slave for the rest of my life or I can go and fight and possibly get an automatic ticket to heaven. So what happens is these slaves, these serfs rather, they leave their homes, go to Jerusalem and start fighting. So the system of feudalism is wildly weakened. Effect number 2. Trade increases as people come more in contact with one another. People from Europe, people from Africa, people from the Middle East, they're all coming in contact with one another, and trade goods are being exchanged from all different places. The world is literally getting smaller and smaller. And then finally, effect number 3, is that there is still conflict in the city of Jerusalem to this day, to 2020. Jews, Christians, and Muslims still live within the city. It is a very small city. Think back to that map I showed you yesterday, and there is still conflict as these people are vying for control of this city. So today, kiddos, what you guys are going to do is you guys are going to use this PowerPoint to answer the questions that are posted on Google Classroom. I've attached this video, but I've also attached the PowerPoint. So if you want to go through at your speed, you're welcome to do so. You kids have been doing so good. I'm very proud to call myself your teacher. Have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you back here on Monday.